celebrate while her father, Mr. Hong, and 𝐿 was sitting on the sofa before her as if they were the boss. 𝐿 gazed at her head to toe with a lopsided smile. Hot girl. While looked at him, heaving in response, making her blood boil in rage. Shut that filthy mouth of yours, she yelled at him and stepped forward, raising her hand. Are you out of your mind? Stay still. Mrs. Hong held her with teary eyes, ran past her father and the stair who stood, stepping towards her. I love bold girls. He grinned, standing and shoving his hands into his pockets. Spit it, wine, where is the liar? He asked through a clenched jaw. I won't tell. As long as I'm alive, you can't hand her to this monster. Don't you know he's already married once? Stop talking nonsense. It's my decision, my choice to make this lie with him. She chuckled bitterly. What about the last choice? Her decision. She's just 18 and she wants to study. Can't you see that? You just see profit in your business. I wish you weren't our father. She yelled at him, her voice broke while the next second she felt a sharp pain against her cheek. I'm your father, you don't have to teach me anything. He raised his hand again to slap her, but 𝐿 caught it. What pained him was her last sentence. He never thought hearing this from his daughter would hurt so much. Enough, Hong, 𝐿 said coldly. Hong let out a shaky breath and stepped back. Why did you stop? Come on, hit me. She yelled, wiping her face. Keep quiet, wine. While let out a sigh, seeing her mother's teary eyes. Mrs. Hong hugged her, sobbing silently while wine was throwing daggers at 𝐿. I don't want to marry the liar anymore. Instead, I want to marry this wine. He stared at her with a smirk and stepped forward. Don't even think about it, she said through clenched jaw. Hong, your business will be drowned. Don't worry, she'll marry you. She shot her dad a glare and opened her mouth to speak. I'll divorce you, Mom, if you deny. Mrs. Hong stared at him with disbelief and stepped backward. This is how low you can scoop. 𝐿 held her by the nape of her neck, making her go numb. I'm sure your mom wouldn't want to risk her marriage for you, he said in a husky voice, rubbing his thumb over her throat. One glanced at Mrs. Hong, who avoided her gaze. She pushed 𝐿 with full force, but he barely moved. Don't touch me with your filthy hands, she muttered with rageful eyes. He smiled, running his fingers through his hair. Wine had an urge to destroy his handsome face. Just in 2 days, you'll be within my reach, and you'll feel my presence deep within you, even touching every inch of your soul. He whispered into her ear. The meaning underneath his words made her shudder. She clenched her fist. So Hong, tomorrow I will take my bride for shopping. Keep an eye on her. I won't take a second to destroy your whole family. He warned him. Mr. Hong nodded while wine ran back to her room. Mrs. Hong stared at her, retreating further helplessly. Next day, when arrived at the bridal shop with 𝐿, she hadn't talked to her mom since last night. Now, as they entered the shop, 𝐿 made an attempt to hold her hand, but she swiftly moved away and passed him in there. Don't even think to touch me, she muttered with disgust. 𝐿 let out a chuckle. Don't worry, baby, I have planned our unforgettable wedding night, he whispered into her ear, brushing his lips against her earlobe. Wine felt chills running down her spine. The sales girl approached them and led them the way. She picked out a few gowns for wine, while 𝐿 stood behind her, watching her keenly. You really dared to insult me. I'll make you fall for me, only to break you, he thought, staring at her delicate features. This is a bit too revealing for me. 𝐿 curled up, his lips twitched into a smirk. Excuse me, the sales girl turned towards him. Bring out a few gowns which are backless. I want my fiancé to try them, he said with a smirk, while his gaze was fixated on wine, who barely controlled her anger. The sales girl glanced at both of them confusingly and walked away. What are you trying to do? She asked, clenching her fist. Nothing, I just want to choose a dress for you, one of my likings, he said with a shrug, while let out a sigh. She didn't want to make any scene here. She tried hard to stay calm while the sales girl came with a few gowns. Wine stared at her with a poker face. She went to trial room and changed into it. He didn't like any of them. There was the last gown remaining, which Wine was purposely avoiding. The sales girl handed it to her. She walked into the trial room while 𝐿 sat waiting for her impatiently. After a few moments, Wine came out with a lower gaze. As soon as 𝐿's gaze caught the sight of her, he forgot to blink his eyes. The The gown was backless with deep cleavage and thigh-high slit on the right side. She covered her back with her hair. Then spontaneously stood and walked closer to her. "Ma'am, you look stunning in this," Wayne managed to pass her an awkward smile. Then turned her around. "What are you doing?" she asked nervously as he moved all her hair to the front. "Stay still." She could feel his warm breath on her back. "Is it too deep?" he asked, brushing his fingers against her back. Wayne swiftly turned around. "Yes, it is, and I am not buying it." He smiled widely, sliding his hands into his pockets. "Now we must buy it." He turned towards the sales girl. "Pack this." The girl swiftly nodded while Wayne stomped into the trial room, huffing and puffing. Wedding day. Wayne was standing in front of him with a poker face. Her gaze was fixed on his shoes. She refused to walk down the aisle with her father. Now the priest announced the wedding vows. Wayne was standing quietly. Everyone were waiting for her response. She felt a squeeze around her hand, jolting her out of her thoughts. As she looked up, her red eyes met Thane's dark eyes. "I do," she mumbled, shooting daggers at him. He smiled in response. "You may kiss the bride." Wayne slightly shook her head in denial. Thane grinned, holding her by the waist and pulled her closer. He took off her veil. She closed her eyes, sadly praying the world would swallow her alive. His heart skipped a beat, staring at her quivering lips. He subconsciously leaned forward and captured her lips. He kissed her softly. The hall erupted with applause and cheers, breaking his trance. He swiftly pulled out, taken aback by his subconscious gesture. He didn't have intention to kiss her on the lips. Pulling her closer was just to scare her. He was surprised by himself. Wayne. Mrs. Hong came towards her with teary eyes. Wayne pretended not to hear and looked away. Then glanced at mother and daughter and walked out, taking out his cigarette from his pocket. He wanted to clear his mind. "Please go away, I don't want to talk to you," she said, avoiding her gaze. Mrs. Hong clenched her fist and blinked away her tears. Time skip. Wayne arrived at Thane's residence. All the way both of them were silent. Wayne didn't spare a glance at her parents. She just walked past them and sat in the car. She bottled up all her tears and emotions. She didn't want anyone to think she was weak. Mrs. Hong pleaded with him to take care of her daughter and ignore her mistakes. Thane was confused by his feelings. He felt like the conflict between the mother and daughter was because of him. Now he led Wayne to his bedroom. Wayne looked around the room. It was beautifully decorated with roses scattered all over the room. She clenched her jaw. Thane leaned on the door frame, staring at her. "Where is my luggage?" she asked, taking off her jewelry. Thane came forward and stood behind her. "Why are you hurrying? We still have a long night," he said in a husky voice, brushing his fingers from her shoulder to her bare back. Wayne turned towards him. "I swear I won't hesitate to hit you if you try to touch me." She pointed her index finger and glared at him. Then chuckled and leaned closer. "What would you do?" he said, and bit her finger, making her gasp. She raised her hand to slap him, but Thane was fast enough to hold it. "Don't touch me." She released her hand with a jerk and pushed him. He took a few steps back as he wasn't ready for her sudden move. "You know what, you're not even sleeping in this room," she said, and pushed him towards the door. Then clenched his fist. His eyes were bloodshot. He grabbed her by the jaw and pinned her against the wall. "Don't test my patience, woman. I don't want to do something I and you both would regret later." His voice was dangerously dark and deep, sending shivers down her spine. "Stay within your limits." He released her with a jerk and walked out, not forgetting to slam the door behind. Wayne released the breath that she was unknowingly holding. Her face turned pale and her lips were white. She slid down the wall, trying hard to control her trembling heart. Next day. It was past 2 p.m. and Wayne woke up with a heavy heart. The whole night she was awake. After 6:30 a.m. she slept in the morning. She freshened up and wandered around the house to find kitchen. Last night she decided to accept her fate and not argue with him anymore, but she wasn't going to show him her fear. She didn't know where Thane slept last night. That was least of her concerns. Now she came to the kitchen to prepare breakfast for herself, but then she decided to make for Thane as well. Even if he refused to eat, it wouldn't hurt her. She was drowned in her thoughts. What are you doing here? His voice startled her, which resulted in her cutting her finger. Then rushed towards her. Are you blind? He held her hand and gently pressed his finger against it. It's just a minor cut. She tried to pull out her hand and glared at her. Why are you here? He cleaned her finger and picked out the bandage from the cabinet. It's past lunchtime, but I'm preparing breakfast. She glanced at the bandage on her finger. Go and wait, the breakfast will be ready in a few minutes. He wanted to say something but stopped and walked out. After a while, they were both sitting and eating in silence until Ken spoke. We are invited to a party tonight. Be ready at 6:30 p.m. He said without looking at her. Mine just hummed in response. He stood and walked away but stopped. Thanks for the meal, it was delicious. He said over his shoulder and walked away. Mine stared at his retreating figure with a faint smile. Her dad never liked her food. Instead, he would tell her not to enter the kitchen. She ate with a smile and sudden happiness. At party, Mine wore a black, knee-length off-shoulder gown with her hair tied in a messy bun. It was hard for him to take his eyes off her. As they entered, everyone's gaze turned towards them. Then held her cold hand firmly. Why are you so nervous? He asked in a low tone. I have never been to any kind of party. She muttered, moving closer to him. His presence gave her a sense of security and comfort in this many people. It's alright, just stay by my side. No need to talk to anyone. She nodded, tightening her grip on his hand. One by one, Thane's business partners came up to greet them. One was clinging to Thane's side the whole time until a few ladies approached them and took her away. Thane just watched her helplessly. He had seen many people staring at her lustfully, which boiled his blood. He just wanted to take her away, hide her in his arms. He regretted coming here. The two ladies introduced Ryan to the other friends. She discovered Thane's ex-wife's name was Marina. They also said how much caring and loving Thane was towards Marina. For some reason, that part hurt Ryan. Since they have encountered, they just showed rage and hate towards each other. She also wanted a loving and caring husband and a happy life. She was looking around for Thane as the ladies went away, but Thane was nowhere to find. She was about to turn around when she felt a smack on her hip, making her startled. She turned around and saw a guy walking away while winking at her. Her heart trembled while tears swelled up in her eyes. She blinked her tears and made her way in his direction to teach him a lesson when she felt a grip on her elbow. Where are you going? She raised her hand ready to slap him but stopped in midway saying Thane. What happened? He released her elbow and raised his brows. God, she let out a deep breath. Let's go home. I don't feel good, she mumbled, holding his hand firmly as if her life depended on it. Alright, wait for me in the lobby. I'll get the car. She just nodded, walking towards the lobby. Then walked out while Ryan was standing impatiently in the lobby looking around. The lobby was empty until she heard footsteps coming from behind. The person walked past her. As soon as Ryan recognized him, she walked towards him and turned him towards her, holding his hand. A loud slap echoed in the empty lobby, taking the guy off guard. Remember the slap in the future before touching any girl with your filthy hands. She said, spitting on his face, and walked out. Then smiled, muttering, that's my girl, watching them from the corner, and walked out. The guy came back to his senses, but it was too late as she had disappeared from his sight. Time skip. They arrived home. Ryan hurried to the bedroom while Thane sat in the living room. He slid out his phone and dialed a number. Phyllis, I need to hear the news of Darren's death by tomorrow. He touched my woman, cut each of his hands. He muttered through a clenched jaw and declined the call. He closed his eyes and placed his head on the backrest. After a few minutes, he opened his eyes and stood heading towards his bedroom, which was now under the control of his wife. He opened the door and entered. Ryan was staring out of the window. Can't you knock? She said in a hoarse voice, turning her back to him. Thane raised his brow. Do I have to knock and drink to my own room? He asked, moving towards the closet, but she didn't respond. He knew she had been holding back her tears for so long. Thane walked towards the washroom to freshen up. After 15 minutes, he came out. Ryan was reclining on the bed with closed eyes. He moved closer to her and sat on the bed. Why are you crying? She opened her eyes and looked away from him. I'm not crying. reversed, clutching the hem of her shirt. He held her chin and turned her to face him. She slapped away his hand, but he held her hand and pulled her towards him. "Leave me," her voice broke. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She lowered her head. "I don't like to see you shedding tears. You look much better when you act like wildcat, ready to kill me." She sniffed and lifted her head. "It's all because of you." She hit him on the chest. "I hate you. You made my life miserable." She began hitting him constantly. "I love you too." She sank her teeth into his hand, but he didn't even budge. "I said I hate you." He encircled his arms around her, pulling her closer to his chest. "I slapped that guy there." Thane knew she was talking about Darren. "Is that why you are crying? Do you feel bad for him?" "Not at all. I wish I could kill him." He stroked her hair. "Don't worry, he will pay for what he did." "Do you know what he did?" "Yes, I saw his smite." She threw her fist on his chest, cutting him off. "Don't mention that. It disgusts me." He held her hands and locked it at her back. "But you really disappointed me. No matter how complicated our relationship is, you could have told me when I asked you. I'm your husband and you shouldn't hesitate to tell me anything." He didn't know why he was saying all this, but at this moment he just knew how peaceful it was when she was around him. Wine remained silent. He pulled her even closer, stroking her hair softly. She didn't resist making him smile. After a few minutes, he pulled out only to see her soundly asleep. "You would kill me if you saw me holding you like this next morning." He mumbled, brushing the hair from her face, and kissed her forehead. "I'm sorry for everything." He said, staring at her face. It's been more than a week. Mine was quite embarrassed for losing her control in front of Thane. The next day when she woke up, Thane wasn't in the room. They didn't talk about that night again. Mine also discovered about Darren's death. She cooks for Thane and does all his work. He hired the maids, but whenever they came, Mine sent them away. After so many years, Thane felt at home. Now she was scrolling through her phone when the doorbell rang. She opened the door, but from seeing a young woman. "Yes, who do you want to meet?" The lady rolled her eyes and barged in, pushing her aside. "Excuse me, miss, you can't just barge into my house. This is my house. I own everything here, including him." Wine glared at her. "Marina," she stepped closer to her. "I see you know my name. They must be missing me a lot, but now I'm back, so you should leave. I shall remind you that Thane divorced you long ago. Get out of my house before I lose my patience," she said through gritted teeth. "Let Thane come and decide who will go out." Wine opened her mouth to speak, but Marina interrupted her. "Here he is." She turned around and saw Thane. He was staring at Marina, who smiled widely. "I have been waiting for you." She walked towards him and opened her arms to hug him, but Thane walked past her and came towards Wine. As usual, he pulled her into his embrace. It has been a part of his routine whenever he goes to office and comes back, he hugs her. At first, Wine was hesitant, but now she's used to it. It gives her a sense of warmth and comfort. "Damn," Marina's voice made him roll his eyes. "Why haven't you thrown her out yet?" He pulled out and said to Wine, "Why don't you throw her out?" He smiled, pulling her closer and nodded. "Sure." Marina clenched her fist and came forward. "Then I'm back to apologize for what I did. We'll sort it out and get back together." She was about to hold his hand, but Wine slapped away her hand. "Are you done?" She frowned. "Get lost from here, greedy woman. You have no idea how disgusting I feel." "I know." I then grabbed her by the elbow and dragged her out. "I know you need money. You can sell yourself if you're that poor. Don't show up here again." He closed the door in her face, took out the handkerchief, and wiped his hands. "How come you are early today?" He walked towards her. "I'll tell you that later." He cupped her face and pressed a long kiss on her forehead. "Why are you being so nice, lovey-dovey to me? Do you want me to fall for you and you will leave me for revenge? Are you having that same typical idea?" she asked with raised brows, Thane chuckled, pressing his forehead against her. "I'll be honest, at first I had that idea, but then I kind of lost control of my feelings when you were around." She remained silent, staring at him with mixed emotions. "What if Marina sincerely wants to get back to you?" "I heard You really cared for her and loved her. She lowered her gaze and said in a low tone, like every ordinary guy, I also wanted to have a happy married life with my wife. But I didn't know Marina was forced. She stayed with me for a year because I had money. But when 2 years back my parents were killed, our business was drowned. So she asked for a divorce. She left me when I needed her the most. He left her face holding her chin. Does that mean you didn't love her? He shook his head in denial. I couldn't bring myself to love her after knowing she had someone else in her life. Man just nodded. How about Stella? Didn't you like her? Than chuckled. No, she's just innocent. I was too bored in my life, so I wanted some adventure. After all, I couldn't spend my entire life alone. So I needed someone who didn't talk back to me or look into my eyes and question me. But here I end up falling for exact opposite. He kissed her nose, my wildcat. She glared at him. Marriage was an adventure to you. Sam laughed, shrugging his shoulders and leaned closer to her. He kissed her softly on the lips. For a while, Ryan's mind was in a daze. What happened? He said with a smile and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her closer. Forward, she said with a smile and placed her head on his chest. Go and freshen up. Do you want to eat something? She placed her chin on his chest and lifted her head. No, I have to complete some of my work, pecked her lips. Go get ready, your mom and sister are coming. A wave of surprise flashed in her eyes. I'm sorry, I know all the conflict between you and your mom is because of me. She called me a few days ago and said your sister is back and they both want to meet you. She bit her lower lip and nodded. 2 years later, Wayne was lying on the hospital bed staring at Them, who was squinted towards their newborn baby. Them, what's it? Why are you staring at him like that? He looked at Wayne and shook his head. Wayne, he's such a pervert. Just look at his age. He's barely a few hours old. Wayne burst into laughter. Them, are you serious? What would that poor soul do? They let out a sigh and sat straight holding her hand. Didn't you see how he was staring at that nurse? He pointed at the baby who was now staring at Wayne and smiling. See, he's staring at you as well. He glared at the little boy who sucked his thumb. Come on, Theo, he's my son. He can stare at me, and that doesn't make him pervert. And you are the biggest pervert. He has to stop accusing my innocent boy. She shook her head in disbelief, stroking the baby's forehead, who was almost asleep by now. The door opened, revealing Zelaya, their mom and dad. Congratulations, Sonia, I'm so happy for you. She threw her arms over Wayne. Mr. and Mrs. Hong smiled, staring at them with fondness. Thank you. Zelaya broke the hug and took the baby well. Mrs. Hong stepped towards Wayne and kissed her forehead. Congratulations. She hugged her, then stood in the corridor while Mr. Hong pat Wayne's head. She just smiled faintly at him and looked away.